A bear walks into a police station, and what he hands to the officer leaves everyone in shock. With the girl, a story that will leave you speechless. What happens in the middle changes the ending completely. We'd love to know which city you're watching this video from. Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all our content. Mill Creek, Tennessee, wasn't known for much. Nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, it was a sleepy town where time seemed to slow. Life was predictable, almost uneventful, until the day little Emily Harper went missing. Emily was just 6 years old, with blonde pigtails and an infectious giggle that echoed through her quiet neighborhood. She had been last seen playing in her backyard on a sunny afternoon. By dusk, she was gone. The police department was small, only a handful of officers led by Chief William Harris, a grizzled man with decades of experience but weary eyes. Tension filled the room as officers debated leads. Was it an outsider passing through? A local with something to hide? Theories collided in the cramped meeting room, but no answers surfaced. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from the hallway, a dragging noise, slow and deliberate. The officers froze, exchanging uneasy glances. Chief Harris placed a hand on the grip of his sidearm. The door creaked open. Standing there, to everyone's disbelief, was a young black bear. The bear wasn't aggressive, it was cautious, its dark eyes scanning the room. In its mouth, it held something, a scrap of fabric. "Don't move," Harris whispered, though the bear seemed uninterested in causing harm. The bear dropped the fabric onto the floor with a wet thud, then backed away, retreating down the corridor and out the door. Michael Carter, the youngest detective on the force, stepped forward. The room was silent as he knelt to inspect the object. His heart sank. It was a piece of Emily's pink jacket, smeared with dirt and dried blood. "We need to follow it," Michael said, standing abruptly. "Follow a bear?" one officer scoffed. "You're out of your mind." But Michael was resolute. "That bear brought us a clue. It knows something." Harris hesitated, torn between logic and the desperate need for answers. "Fine," he said at last. "Take backup. And a rifle, just in case." Michael grabbed his flashlight, holstered his weapon, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The bear was still there, lingering at the edge of the forest as if waiting for him. Without a word, it turned and began to walk. Michael followed. The forest was dense, its towering trees casting long shadows under the fading light. The bear moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to glance back, as if ensuring Michael was keeping up. Soon, they came across the first sign, a small footprint in the soft earth, too small to belong to an adult. Michael crouched to examine it. "Emily," he whispered to himself. The bear continued, leading him deeper into the woods. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence fell, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Then they found more clues, a toy doll snagged on a branch, a tattered ribbon fluttering in the breeze. Michael's pulse quickened. He radioed in his findings, urging reinforcements to join him. But the deeper he went, the more unsettling the forest became. The usual hum of wildlife was absent. Shadows seemed to move just beyond his vision, and strange noises, like whispers, drifted through the trees. Finally, they reached a clearing. In its center stood a dilapidated cabin, almost swallowed by the surrounding vegetation. The bear stopped, staring at the structure. Michael stepped forward, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. The cabin door was ajar, swinging lightly in the wind. He called out Emily's name, his voice trembling slightly. Then, the door creaked open wider. A man emerged, a wiry figure with disheveled hair and a nervous demeanor. He carried a backpack, its contents bulging and barely contained. When he saw Michael, his eyes widened, and he bolted. "Stop!" Michael shouted, giving chase. Before Michael could draw his weapon, the bear charged. In one powerful motion, it knocked the man to the ground. The backpack spilled open, revealing a jumble of items, a child's shoe, a stuffed animal, and a crumpled map marked with red ink. Michael restrained the man as the bear stepped back, watching silently. "Who are you?" Michael demanded. "Where's Emily?" The man didn't answer. He just stared at the bear, trembling in fear. Moments later, the sound of sirens pierced the air as reinforcements arrived. Harris and the others surrounded the scene, taking the man into custody. But Michael's focus was on the map. The red ink marked another location, deeper in the forest. "It's not over," Michael said, his voice grim. "There's someone else out there." As the team prepared to move, the bear turned and began walking again, heading further into the woods. Michael hesitated for only a moment before following. The night had fully descended by the time Michael and the team regrouped. The suspect they apprehended had been carted off to the station, but the man's silence had offered no answers. All eyes were now on the map found in the discarded backpack, a crude, hand-drawn outline of the forest surrounding Mill Creek, with several areas circled in red. The largest circle was marked just beyond their current location, further into the woods. "Whatever's out there," Chief Harris said, scanning the map with a furrowed brow, "we need to find it fast. If there's a chance Emily's still alive, we can't waste time." Michael nodded. He could feel the weight of every second ticking by. The bear, his unlikely guide, stood at the edge of the clearing, waiting with an almost unnatural patience. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances, muttering about the strangeness of trusting a wild animal. But Michael didn't care. Something deep inside him told him the bear was key. The forest seemed to close in tighter around them as the team advanced, their flashlights cutting narrow beams through the darkness. The bear moved confidently, its massive paws silent against the forest floor. The trail quickly grew treacherous. Thorny brambles snagged at their uniforms, and the air grew thick with the damp, earthy scent of moss and decay. They found more evidence along the way, disturbing pieces that hinted at Emily's struggle. A torn piece of shoelace. A crayon, its yellow wax snapped in half. "Chief," Michael called softly, pointing to the ground. Small footprints, partially obscured by larger ones, were pressed into the soil. The larger prints were booted, heavy, and deliberate. "She wasn't alone," Harris muttered, his jaw tightening. "Someone dragged her through here." The officers spread out slightly, their radios crackling as they coordinated. But as they moved deeper, an oppressive tension settled over the group. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, rustling leaves, were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. At one point, the bear stopped abruptly, its ears swiveling forward. It let out a low growl, a sound that sent shivers down Michael's spine. The officers froze, their weapons raised. "Did you hear that?" one of them whispered. A faint noise drifted through the trees, a child's cry. Michael's heart leapt. "Emily," he called, his voice cracking. The cry came again, distant but unmistakable. The bear took off, moving faster now, and Michael broke into a run to keep up. The others followed, their boots crunching against the forest floor. The sound led them to another clearing, but this one was different. It was dominated by a massive, gnarled tree, its roots curling above the ground like skeletal fingers. Beneath its twisted branches sat a shallow pit, and within it lay a makeshift campsite, blankets, food wrappers, and a rope that had clearly been used to tie someone. Michael's stomach churned. "It's fresh," one of the officers said, crouching to inspect the area. "Whoever was here just left." The bear paced around the clearing, sniffing at the ground, before turning its attention to a narrow trail leading away from the pit. It growled again, low and guttural. "We're close," Michael said, gripping his flashlight tighter. They followed the new trail, moving swiftly. The forest seemed to press in even tighter, the trees standing like silent sentinels. Michael could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, driving him forward despite the growing unease. Then, they saw it. Another cabin loomed ahead, this one larger and in better condition than the last. A faint light glowed from inside, visible through the slats of boarded-up windows. The child's cries were clearer now, muffled but frantic. "She's in there," Michael whispered, his voice tinged with urgency. Harris signaled for the team to surround the cabin. They moved carefully, their weapons drawn, each step deliberate. Michael and Harris approached the front door while two other officers flanked the sides. "On my count," Harris said, his voice low. But before he could finish, the bear surged forward, barreling into the door with its massive body. The wood splintered under the force, the door swinging open with a deafening crash. The inside of the cabin was chaotic. A man, taller and more muscular than the one they'd apprehended earlier, spun around, his face twisted in shock. He held a hunting knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. Emily was tied to a chair in the corner, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "Drop the knife," Harris shouted, aiming his weapon. The man didn't comply. Instead, he lunged toward Emily, the knife raised. Before anyone could react, the bear roared, a deep, primal sound that shook the walls of the cabin. It charged, slamming into the man with incredible force and sending him sprawling to the ground. The knife clattered away, landing out of reach. Michael rushed to Emily, cutting the ropes that bound her as the other officers secured the suspect. She clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably. "You're safe now," Michael whispered, holding her close. The bear stood over the subdued man, its dark eyes fixed on him with an almost human intensity. The man's face was pale, his body trembling as he stared up at the animal. "You don't understand," the man muttered, his voice barely audible. "It's not over. You're too late." The words sent a chill through Michael. "What do you mean?" he demanded, stepping closer. The man didn't answer. Instead, he began to laugh, a hollow, chilling sound that echoed through the cabin. Michael glanced at Harris, who looked just as unsettled. As they searched the cabin, they found more disturbing evidence, photographs of Emily and other children, maps of the forest, and a list of names. Most had been crossed out. But the most unsettling find was hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a series of symbols carved into the wood, accompanied by strange, handwritten notes. They spoke of rituals, sacrifices, and something, or someone, referred to only as the Keeper. Michael's unease deepened. Outside, the bear stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness. It let out another low growl, then turned to look at Michael, as if urging him to follow. "Chief," Michael said, his voice grave. "This isn't over. There's more going on here than we thought." Harris nodded. "Then let's finish it." The team prepared to move again, this time with Emily safely in their care. But as they stepped into the night, the forest seemed darker, heavier, as if the shadows themselves were alive. The bear began to walk once more, leading them into the unknown. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees and shadows, it felt alive, watching. The deeper Michael and the team went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Emily had been taken back to safety by a separate unit, but her fragile cries still echoed in Michael's mind. He couldn't shake the man's final, cryptic words, "It's not over. You're too late." The bear pressed forward, its step steady and deliberate. The officers followed closely, though their unease was palpable. Flashlights cast long, flickering beams through the trees, illuminating glimpses of twisted roots and claw-like branches. "What the hell did we stumble into?" one of the officers muttered under his breath. Chief Harris grunted in response, his eyes scanning the path ahead. "Something bigger than we ever imagined," he said grimly. The symbols found beneath the cabin floorboards had been photographed and sent back to the station for analysis, but they lingered in Michael's mind. The carvings were crude, yet deliberate, as if made by someone deeply committed, or deeply disturbed. The word the keeper repeated over and over, alongside phrases that hinted at rituals and offerings. As they walked, the bear abruptly stopped, sniffing the air. Its ears perked up, and it let out a low growl. "What is it?" Michael whispered, his hand hovering near his holster. The bear suddenly turned off the trail, plunging into a denser part of the forest. The officers hesitated. "Do we follow it?" one of them asked. Michael nodded without hesitation. "It hasn't steered us wrong yet." The bear led them to another clearing, smaller and eerier than the last. At its center stood an old, moss-covered well. The stones were cracked and weathered, and the ground around it was littered with bones, small ones, likely animals, but the sight was unsettling. "What is this place?" Harris asked, his voice low. Michael stepped closer, shining his flashlight down into the well. The beam barely penetrated the darkness, but he could see that the walls were damp, and there was a faint smell of decay. The bear circled the well, growling softly. Then, it stopped and pawed at the ground near its base. Michael knelt to investigate. As he dug into the soil, his fingers brushed against something hard. He pulled it free, a rusted metal box, its lid sealed shut with a heavy clasp. "What is that?" Harris asked, moving closer. Michael pried the box open. Inside was a collection of items that sent a chill down his spine, a small journal, a lock of blonde hair tied with a pink ribbon, and a photograph of Emily, her innocent smile frozen in time. Harris's face darkened. "They've been watching her. Planning this." Michael opened the journal. The handwriting was jagged and erratic, the words scrawled in uneven lines. Most of it was incomprehensible rambling about the keeper and the forest's will, but one phrase stood out: the offering must be made at the hollow tree. Only then will the keeper be appeased. Michael's throat tightened. "The hollow tree," he said aloud. "Do you know where that is?" Harris nodded slowly. "There's an old tree about 2 miles from here. It's a local legend, people say it's cursed. No one goes near it." Michael looked at the bear, which was already moving toward a new trail. "Looks like we're going," he said, standing. The journey to the hollow tree was harrowing. The forest seemed to grow darker with every step, as if the light itself was being swallowed. Strange noises echoed around them, rustling leaves, snapping branches, and faint whispers that made the hairs on Michael's neck stand on end. "Do you hear that?" one officer asked, his voice trembling. "Stay focused," Harris barked, though his own unease was evident. As they neared the tree, the air grew colder. The hollow tree came into view, and it was unlike anything Michael had ever seen. Its massive trunk was twisted and blackened, with a gaping hole at its base that looked like a mouth frozen mid-scream. The ground around it was barren, as if nothing dared grow near it. The bear stopped at the edge of the clearing, growling deeply. Michael scanned the area with his flashlight. At first, there was nothing, but then he saw movement. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the faint beam of light. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and hollow. She wore a long, tattered cloak, and her hands clutched a gnarled wooden staff. "Who are you?" Michael demanded, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his chest. The woman smiled, a cold, unsettling expression. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice raspy and distant, as if coming from somewhere far away. "We're looking for answers," Harris said, stepping forward. And we're not leaving until we get them. The woman's smile faded. The keeper does not tolerate trespassers, she said. You've already disturbed the balance. Michael exchanged a glance with Harris. The keeper, he said. What is it? What are you doing here? The woman raised her staff, pointing it toward the hollow tree. The keeper protects the forest, she said. And the forest demands sacrifice. Before anyone could react, a deafening roar filled the air. But it wasn't the bear, it came from the tree itself. The ground shook, and the gaping hole at the base of the tree seemed to expand, as if the tree was alive. Get back! Harris shouted, but it was too late. From the darkness of the tree's hollow emerged a figure, twisted, humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its skin bark-like and cracked, and its eyes glowed an unnatural green. The keeper. It let out a guttural growl, its movements jerky and unnatural as it stepped into the clearing. The woman dropped to her knees, bowing her head. The keeper will cleanse this land, she said. The officers opened fire, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. The keeper advanced, its glowing eyes locking onto Michael. Before it could strike, the bear charged, slamming into the creature with a force that shook the ground. The two tangled in a brutal fight, the bear's roars mixing with the unearthly shrieks of the keeper. Go! Harris shouted. We need to move. Michael hesitated, watching the bear fight with everything it had. But he knew they couldn't stay. This isn't over, he muttered, gripping the journal tightly as the team retreated into the forest. As they ran, the sounds of the battle faded, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the keeper wasn't finished, and neither was the bear. The team regrouped a safe distance from the hollow tree, but Michael couldn't shake the haunting image of the keeper and the bear locked in combat. The primal roar still echoed in his ears. He clutched the journal tighter, his mind racing with possibilities. What the hell was that thing? One of the officers asked, his face pale with fear. I don't know, Harris admitted, but it's nothing we were prepared for. Michael flipped through the journal again, hoping to find something they'd missed. Among the scattered ramblings, one entry stood out: when the keeper awakens, the forest will bleed. The offering is the only way to seal the hollow. Michael's stomach churned. The so-called offering wasn't just about Emily, it was something far bigger, something ancient. The hollow tree is some kind of gateway, Michael said, his voice steady but strained. Whatever that thing is, it's tied to the forest. If we don't stop it now, this town isn't going to survive. Harris frowned. And how exactly do we stop something like that? Michael pointed to the journal. The keeper needs an offering. But maybe we can trick it. If we destroy the hollow tree, we might cut off whatever's feeding it. Harris hesitated. Destroying a tree didn't sound like much of a plan, but after what they'd just seen, logic had taken a back seat. The bear's still out there, Michael added. If it survived, we might need its help. Harris nodded reluctantly. Fine. But we're going in prepared. No one takes a step closer to that thing without backup. The next day, the entire department was mobilized. Reinforcements arrived from neighboring counties, bringing heavy equipment and enough firepower to arm a small battalion. The officers were skeptical about the mission. How could bullets and chainsaws stop something as supernatural as the keeper? Michael didn't have answers. But he knew they couldn't ignore the threat. As the team prepared to enter the forest, Emily's parents arrived, pleading for answers. Michael assured them their daughter was safe now, but he couldn't tell them the truth about what they'd uncovered. The bear reappeared at the edge of the woods just before the team set out. Its fur was matted with blood, but its eyes burned with determination. Michael felt an odd sense of gratitude and respect. It's still alive, one of the officers murmured. Michael crouched beside the bear, meeting its gaze. You're with us, aren't you? The bear let out a low huff, then turned toward the forest, ready to lead them once more. The trek back to the hollow tree was grueling. The forest seemed angrier, more alive. The ground pulsed faintly under their boots, and the air smelled of rot. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, darting between trees. Stay close. Harris barked, his voice echoing through the unnatural silence. When they reached the clearing, the hollow tree stood like a monument to decay. Its gaping mouth had widened, and thick roots writhed around its base like living snakes. The keeper was nowhere in sight. Maybe we scared it off, one officer said nervously. Michael shook his head. It's waiting. The bear stepped forward, growling softly. Then, as if on cue, the ground began to shake. The keeper emerged from the shadows, its grotesque form more monstrous than before. Its limbs had grown longer, its bark-like skin cracked and oozing a dark, sap-like substance. Its glowing green eyes fixed on the group. Positions. Harris shouted. The officers opened fire. Bullets tore into the keeper, but it didn't falter. It let out a bone-chilling screech, and the roots of the tree surged forward, wrapping around several officers and pulling them toward the hollow. Fall back. Harris ordered, but Michael held his ground. He turned to the bear. If we destroy the tree, can we stop this? The bear let out a thunderous roar and charged toward the tree, slamming into the writhing roots with ferocious strength. Michael didn't hesitate. He grabbed an axe from one of the officers and ran toward the tree. The keeper lunged for him, but the bear intercepted it, clawing and biting with relentless fury. Michael, get back! Harris shouted, but Michael ignored him. He swung the axe with all his strength, striking the hollow tree's base. The wood splintered, but it was tougher than he'd anticipated. He kept swinging, each blow echoing through the forest. The keeper shrieked, as if feeling the pain of the tree. It turned toward Michael, its glowing eyes narrowing. Michael, move! Harris screamed. Just as the keeper lunged, the bear tackled it again, holding it back with a strength that seemed almost supernatural. Michael gave one final swing, and the tree split open with a deafening crack. A blinding green light poured out, engulfing the clearing. The keeper let out a final, agonized scream before its body crumbled into ash. The bear staggered, its body battered and bleeding. It let out one last roar, then collapsed at the base of the shattered tree. Michael dropped the axe, his hands trembling. The forest seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. It's over, Harris said, his voice barely audible. The air in the station was thick with exhaustion. Officers milled about, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes haunted by what they'd witnessed. The events at the hollow tree defied logic, and while the keeper was gone, a palpable unease lingered among them. Michael sat at his desk, staring at the rusted metal box they'd recovered from the well. It still held the photograph of Emily, the ribbon of her hair, and the journal. He flipped through the journal again, his fingers tracing the jagged writing. The earlier entries were chaotic, but the final pages were eerily calm, as if the writer had achieved some dark clarity. One entry read, "The keeper does not die. It transforms. What you take from the forest, it reclaims. What you destroy, it rebuilds." Michael's breath hitched. The phrasing felt deliberate, almost like a warning. A knock on his desk snapped him out of his thoughts. Chief Harris stood over him, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of Michael and sat down across from him. "You've been at that thing for hours," Harris said. "Go home. Get some sleep." Michael shook his head. "Something doesn't add up, Chief. We stopped the keeper, but it doesn't feel over." Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's over, Michael. The tree's gone, the forest is quiet, and the girl's safe. I don't know what that thing was, but it's gone. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. That's the problem. The journal says the keeper isn't something we can kill, it's part of the forest. If the forest is still here, then so is it. Harris frowned but didn't respond. He wanted to argue, to reassure Michael that they'd won, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the young detective might be right. The following morning, Michael returned to the forest alone. He knew it was reckless, but he couldn't silence the nagging voice in his mind. The area around the hollow tree had been cordoned off, but the once twisted clearing now seemed ordinary. The ground where the tree had stood was charred and blackened, the roots reduced to ash. Michael crouched beside the crater, running his fingers over the scorched earth. He thought about the light that had erupted from the tree, the way the keeper had screamed as it was consumed. But where had the light gone? And why did the journal speak of a seed? As he sifted through the ashes, Michael's fingers brushed against something smooth and hard. He pulled it free, his heart sinking as he stared at it. A single acorn. Its shell was black and glossy, faintly warm to the touch. Veins of green light pulsed beneath the surface, like tiny rivers of energy. Michael's pulse quickened. Back at the station, he placed the acorn on his desk, staring at it like it might burst into flames. He considered destroying it, crushing it under his boot or throwing it into a fire, but something stopped him. His gut told him that destroying the seed wouldn't solve anything. If the keeper was tied to the forest, then the forest would find a way to reclaim what was lost. He returned to the journal, flipping to the final page. In the very last line, written in shaky handwriting, was a cryptic phrase: "The keeper is bound to the land, but the land is bound to us." Michael closed the journal, his mind racing. The phrase implied that the keeper wasn't just a force of nature, it was connected to humanity in some way. Perhaps the rituals, the offerings, weren't just about appeasing the keeper. Maybe they were about keeping it tethered, preventing it from spreading beyond the forest. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside. Stepping into the main office, he found Harris speaking with one of the officers, who held a bundle of photographs. "What's going on?" Michael asked. The officer handed him the photos. "They're from the aerial recon we did yesterday. Look at this." Michael's eyes scanned the images. They showed the forest surrounding the hollow tree. Most of the trees were barren, their branches twisted and lifeless, but in the center of the clearing, where the hollow tree had once stood, something was growing. A sapling. "It wasn't there yesterday," the officer said, his voice tinged with fear. Michael's chest tightened. He didn't need to see it in person to know what it was. The keeper wasn't gone. It was starting over. Later that night, Michael sat in his car outside Emily's house. He watched the lights flicker in her bedroom window, her parents' silhouettes passing by as they tucked her in. She was safe now, but for how long? He thought about the forest, about the sapling and the acorn on his desk. Destroying the hollow tree had bought them time, but it hadn't stopped the keeper. If anything, it had angered it. Michael started the car and drove to the edge of the forest. He stepped out, the night air cold against his skin. The forest loomed before him, silent and still. He pulled the acorn from his pocket, holding it in his palm. Its faint green glow illuminated his face. "I don't know what you are," he said softly, "but I'm not going to let you take this town." The forest didn't respond, but Michael felt its presence, heavy and watchful. He pocketed the acorn and turned back to his car. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.